first place you'd go if you arrived in Canada and wanted to connect with the ocean and the moon would be to go to the north, to the Arctic. There's no better place to be conscious of your place on the planet than to be at night in the Arctic looking at the moon. I mean, there are parts of the year in the Arctic where you have no sun at all, and so you're totally governed by the phases of the moon. You go months and months without ever seeing the sun, and then eventually the sun is just a tiny little sliver over the horizon just for a few minutes a day. I was up in the Arctic for the first time, up in the Western Arctic, the high Arctic, in January, and it was fully dark, and so you are tethered to the moon in a way there that I think you're not in most other parts of the world. It's really fascinating. So that's the first place. The second place would be to go to Vancouver Island, which is on the far western side of our country, to a place called Ucluelet, which has these marvelous beaches. And again, you just feel a sense of the scale of, your own individual person as it relates to this vast ocean and as it relates to the moon. It's just, it's primeval. It reminds us, I think, of where we come from. I was thinking about the tides and how the tides work. And I got all sort of geeky about it. I was trying to work out, because, the tides, I grew up in the prairies, long, Canadian prairies, far away from the ocean, but I spent every summer on the ocean at my grandmother's place. And the tides were always a mystery to me. I could never really understand. I knew that they were somehow connected to the moon, but I never really understood how to figure out, when the tides were going to come and how people knew when the tides were going to come. So I started looking at it, and it turns out that the tides, high tides, are exactly 12 hours and 25 minutes apart. So they don't happen every day at noon. They move through the day. The high tide moves through the day overnight and comes back. And the reason that it's 12 hours and 25 minutes between high tides is that the Earth and the moon are moving, right? And so it takes the Earth 24 hours to make an orbit. And in that 24 hours, the moon has also moved. And so it takes the Earth 50 minutes to catch up with the moon. And so the tides are, of course, linked to when the moon is pulling on the Earth. But it takes that extra 50 minutes every 24 for the Earth to catch up with the moon. And so the tides are 12 hours and 25 minutes apart. Isn't that weird? So even the tides that if you live on the ocean, you're completely linked into when the tides are. But I didn't know. So the time, therefore, between a high tide and a low tide on every beach is 6 hours and 12 and a half minutes. Go figure. I think it would help us as a species to think more about the moon. I mean, for one thing, the moon is the metaphor for life and death, the tides of life and death. Those are all related to the moon. The moon is a timekeeper. The moon is the original timekeeper of the human species. So it's one thing to look at the sun and see the patterns of the day go through their cycle as they do every day, linked to the sun. It's a whole other understanding of time to think about the weekly cycle, the 4-week cycle of the moon. So from full moon down to new moon and then back again. The waxing and the waning of the moon is a way that we keep time over our months. So this was the original timekeeping method. If you think about the sun also has cycles, but those are on 11 years cycles, and they're magnetic. They're not related to the orbiting of the Earth. They're related to something that's going on within the sun itself. These ancient ties to the cycles of the moon are within us, and they are a metaphor for how we can see time in a less linear way and in a more cyclical, multidimensional way.